Hi there, good afternoon, everybody. I want to welcome you here to the Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show, a show dedicated to progressive rock and other forms of rock music. So, this is Favorites, the show that I do Wednesday midweek. I've been doing this show now for about three and a half years. One of the older shows on the channel. Before that, I was basically just one-off type things all the time, but then I decided to put things into kind of more of an organized fashion because that's the way I am. So today's topic is a five, which is five bands that kind of have been compared to Led Zeppelin. And I'm going to talk about the album and what I think about them makes people think they sound like Zeppelin. So the first band, and these aren't in any particular order, by the way. They're just in the stack as they come up. So the first one up out of it is The Tea Party. And this album, more than any, is really the one that I love. The other albums, they have their hits and miss with them, but this one I think has the kind of strength to it that I like. So this was released, I don't even know, it doesn't even say on here. Let me see if I can find it. Nah, of course, same old. Back in '95. So probably by that time they were fairly new to me. At that time, I didn't. But the reason people used to say they kind of sounded like Zeppelin, for me, I think it was mostly because of that Eastern sound or Oriental sound or Indian sound. The use of those kind of instruments that give that Far East sound to them, because Zeppelin used that on some of their later stuff too, and so people have kind of taken that on. So I think for me though, it's mostly because the music kind of sounds like Zeppelin and the vocals kind of sound like the Doors, so it's a kind of a weird combo. But definitely there's a Zeppelin element to their music, and I think that's why people tend to compare them to Led Zeppelin. So first band out of the blocks, The Tea Party. Next up, I definitely see the correlation here, but some people would say, well, maybe Led Zeppelin sounds like them. I'm not going to argue with it. Deep Purple, specifically in the Burn era or the Mark III lineup, I find there's more of a Zeppelin-ish sound to their music. It's heavy. Definitely, with when I think of Zeppelin, I think of that heavy guitar-dominated, strong vocaled music, and bluesy element to their music. I think you get a lot of that with this particular album and some of and I think the other Mark III album, which features basically David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes, with three of the original members. In this case, John Lord, the drummer, whose name I'm losing. I can see his face right here. I can't remember his name. And of course, Richie Blackmore, Ian Pace. Sorry, I apologize for that. I can see his face, but I'm drawing a blank here. But anyways, the reason I think this has, because it has that heavy bluesy kind of metal sounding thing, I think that's where people get the Zeppelin sound to it. Also, Coverdale's voice, not totally dissimilar from Robert Plant's voice. I think they're both very similar. Kind of explains why Jimmy Page chose to do an album with David Coverdale. It was Coverdale Page because there was that definitely that Robert Plant sound to his voice, and his style of which he presented himself, very similar as well. So Deep Purple, second band here. Third band, this one I fully am on board with, but they're not so much like this anymore. Now this is, I believe, their first album, but I'm not 100% sure because they're still relatively new to me, and this album is actually one that I'm going to be talking about in my new albums released at the end of the month. It's Greta Van Fleet. I believe this is their debut album from 2017. They got that Zeppelin-ish sound to their music. Again, that Far East kind of Oriental or Eastern Indian sound to the music here. Definitely coming in that cashmere feel to it. Now this band has begun to grow away from that sound and may actually be quite a bit further away from it than I originally thought on their third album, which I'm more familiar with. But this is a great band. Even if they do sound kind of Zeppelinish, they bang it on really good. It's solid, hard rock, bluesy kind of Indian sounding music. So Greta Van Fleet as the third band in that list. Of course, this particular album by this band is the one that people cite as Zeppelinish sounding. I don't think the rest of their music going forward really has a lot of that. It's a little bit more on their second album, less on their third, and then virtually none from that point forward. And we're talking about Rush's debut. This is before Neil Peart. So you've got John Rutsey here on drums. Yeah, there's a couple of tracks on here. What You're Doing, of course. Definitely a real kind of Zeppelinish sounding tune. Need Some Love, I think, has a little bit of that Zeppelin cell too, and Finding My Way as well. But generally speaking, I don't hear as much Zeppelin as other people do here. What I hear is a hard rock band here. Obviously, Geddy Lee doesn't sound like Robert Plant at all, although they're in that same kind of high range. But What You're Doing definitely sounds like could be a Zeppelin track, so I can see why people kind of say that. I've heard lots of people say that about this album. I wish I shared that opinion. I just don't, but I think they're a band that are often compared to Led Zeppelin. Next up, another kind of hard rockin' bluesy band, especially the early stuff, and this album more than most. Come and Get It by Whitesnake. Again, you have that Coverdale sound to the vocals here, very Robert Plantish in style, if not wholly in sound. I think Whitesnake has a little bit more of his own sound on it, not as much as he did on Deep Purple. And the songs are kind of bluesy oriented. Some of the other early Whitesnake albums probably maybe sound a little bit more of a Zeppelin clone-ish type thing. But I love this album, and I can hear a little bit of that Zeppelin sound in here. Not a great deal, but still there. So that's the last band on this list, Whitesnake. I'll give you the bands in reverse order now, just in case you come in late here and you don't hear the entire thing. So the 5 bands I think are often compared to Led Zeppelin, and there's more of these bands, but I picked these 5. Whitesnake. This is actually a 70s. Is this a 70s? I think this is a 70s album. Could be, not sure. Rush, of course, their debut. Greta Van Fleet, I think this is their debut too. It might be their second album, but I think it's their debut. Deep Purple's Burn, or the Mark III lineup because of Coverdale, and they have that very kind of deep kind of heaviness about their albums it's also got a bluesy element too. And then of course the Tea Party with their melodic music and their oriental or eastern sound to their music as well. So that's it. Those are the 5 bands I've chosen. If you've got other bands that you think definitely belong in this list, please put them in the comment section, and if I haven't heard them, I'll go listen to them for sure. Lots of good stuff out there, and you can kind of understand why bands imitate Led Zeppelin. They were hugely popular, hugely cool sounding, lots of great music, and very influential, so I can see why people wanted to kind of have that sound like them, but everybody ultimately wants to have their own sound as well. So anyways, please hit the like and subscribe. Again, if you want to make any comments about what I've said or about the bands, or put your own band in the comment section below, great, go right ahead. And we will see you next week on favorites. We will be starting next week, I believe. I'm going to start doing some rankings for probably about a month. I've got a couple of groups I want to rank. I've got a couple of albums I want to rank. I'll probably mix them up a little bit. So I think next week we're probably going to do The Doors. That's the band I'm leaning towards. I'm only going to do the original 6 Doors albums that Jim Morrison was on and with the band before he passed away. They do have 9 albums in total. I don't own the other 3. I have listened to the 2 that came out without Jim Morrison on. I've listened to them, and to be honest, I don't see them going to rank very high, so I'm just going to stick with the original 6, and we'll do those probably next week for my favorites. So please have yourself a good evening, good night, and goodbye.